Welcome to Two Open Doors, the podcast that explores our power to open or close the doors of relationship with the important people in our lives. We hope you'll learn from and share your wisdom with our community. Thanks for joining us. As embodied organisms, we experience pleasure as one of the most prominent guiding forces in our lives. In our Puritanical society, pleasure often is looked down upon as an unworthy source of motivation and guidance for living a productive and meaningful life. The physical reality, though, is that we are wired to be motivated by pleasure and by the avoidance of pain. In this episode, we'll consider that there are two different categories of pleasure, hedonic and eudaimonic. We'll consider how intimate relationships can be a rich source of both kinds of pleasure. We'll also explore how to give pleasure its proper place in our deep human connections. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, born in 341 BCE, developed a philosophy in which pleasure is positioned as an essential aspect of human nature. He held that we humans are fundamentally oriented to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that adhering to those two mandates opened a path to happiness. Like other mammals, we humans actually have two distinct neurobiological systems that mediate pleasure. The first of these produces liking, or an affective or emotional assessment of whether something is good, that is, attractive and desirable, or bad, aversive and undesirable. That assessment gives us guidance as to whether the thing we're considering is likely to be good for us and thus worthy of pursuit, or not, in which case we may choose to withdraw. The second and complementary pleasure-related neurobiological system is dedicated to producing a wanting for something that is assessed as desirable. That system motivates action in response to what we've assessed as desirable or undesirable. What this neural architecture suggests is that we're built to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. This orientation isn't tantamount to biological destiny, though, because our higher cognitive powers are able to intervene in whether we blindly pursue our pleasure or pain inclinations or not. We're not slaves to pleasure or pain. We learn to associate pleasure or pain with many of the things that we encounter in our environment throughout our lives. We are not inflexibly hardwired to gauge everything that we encounter as good or bad in an inflexible way. As an example of this, those who practice BDSM, or kink, know that some sources of pain can instead come to be associated with pleasure. This may seem paradoxical, but it's a testament to how programmable we humans are, based on our experiences and our emotional and thought processes. There are actually two distinct kinds or categories of pleasure, hedonic and eudaimonic. Hedonic pleasure is a very body-centered sort of pleasure that is mediated by specific elements of the human central nervous system. We experience that sort of pleasure through our senses. The descriptor hedonic is derived from the Greek word hedon, which means pleasure. These sources of hedonic pleasure include eating delicious food, enjoying sex, experiencing the feelings of well-being after exercise, feeling warm, comfortable, and without unfulfilled physical needs, etc. This category of pleasure is what most people think of when they hear the word pleasure. Hedonic pleasure is a transient experience. It arrives, passes through us, and is gone. In contrast, eudaimonic pleasures are rooted in more abstract sources of well-being, such as feeling that one is thriving due to leading a meaningful life. Eudaimonic is derived from two Greek words, eu, or good, and daimon, or God/spirit. Eudaimonic pleasure is an active and lasting thing, rather than a passing experience of sensory pleasure. In the ancient Greek tradition promoted by Aristotle, eudaimonic pleasure is based on leading a virtuous life that's guided by reason and oriented toward both personal growth and social contribution. Of course, there can be much difference of opinion over what constitutes a well-lived or virtuous life. Still, it's clear that eudaimonic pleasure is qualitatively different than hedonic pleasure. Hedonic and eudaimonic pleasure behave differently. Hedonic or sensory-based pleasure comes as a passive experience stimulated by some physical source of pleasure. Because of the way our nervous system works, the experience of such pleasure fades over time, quite quickly in fact. We experience hedonic adaptation, through which we become desensitized to the current source of pleasure. As a consequence, to re-experience that pleasure, we need to seek out an even more intense experience of the same sort. And then we adapt to that level of pleasure as well. Unfortunately, that results in a sort of hedonic treadmill, where we can never seem to get enough of the sort of pleasure that we're seeking. That's what happens in the case of drug abuse, wherein the user has to keep increasing the dosage to keep feeling a resulting high. In contrast with hedonic pleasure, eudaimonic pleasure comes from effort that we exert toward a goal that is meaningful to us. That sort of pleasure is much more in the head and heart than is body-centered hedonic pleasure. There's considerable professional debate over the nature of eudaimonic pleasure, whether it results from a personal orientation or from personal traits and behaviors. It's a broader and murkier concept than is hedonic pleasure. Research has shown that experiencing hedonic pleasure promotes positive feelings or positive affect and reduces negative feelings or negative affect. Those effects are both correlated with increased life satisfaction. Eudaimonic pleasure also offers benefits, albeit of a different sort. It, too, can increase positive affect. In addition, though, it can promote an orientation toward self-actualization, satisfaction with life, and a focus on contributing to relationships and to community life. Eudaimonic pleasure is more altruistic and less self-focused than is hedonic pleasure. With our understanding of the two kinds of pleasure, we can ask ourselves where pleasure fits into relationships. Is pleasure something to be actively sought out and emphasized, or might it be distracting from the deeper aspects of intimate relationship? Studies have been done to investigate whether the pursuit or avoidance of hedonic and or eudaimonic pleasure is more effective in promoting a satisfying life by looking at areas such as positive affect, feelings of a meaningful life, feelings of inspiration, and a sense of transcending oneself. Interestingly, those who pursued both hedonic and eudaimonic pleasure were the only group who seemed to enjoy all of those benefits and to flourish. Those who failed to pursue one or both kinds of pleasure did not show those benefits. I believe that these interesting findings about pleasure suggest some useful tips for maintaining healthy and thriving intimate relationships. First, as an essential motivator of human behavior, pleasure needs to be embraced as good and healthy rather than being repressed as unhealthy or distracting. Adopting a joy-filled Epicurean lifestyle might go far toward promoting healthy relationships and a satisfying life. Second, physical pleasure is an important component of relationships. This includes sensual and sexual pleasure, but also whatever other sources of physical pleasure are valued by a couple, things such as dancing or outdoor activities or musical events or shared delicious meals. And third, sources of eudaimonic pleasure are also very important and should be integrated into a relationship. Such sources help partners grow, both as individuals and as a couple. They build a sense of appreciation for life, a sense of awe and beauty, transcendence of a limiting focus on self, etc. Eudaimonic pleasure can be cultivated by reflecting on and planning one's life, by developing a sense of purpose, as well as by pursuing activities that develop that purpose, such as community service, and by regularly recognizing and feeling gratitude for one's good fortune, and by putting energy and intention into nurturing one's relationships. We humans are fortunate to be able to experience a rich and varied palette of pleasures. It's wonderful to be able to share the gift of pleasure with our beloved partners and dear friends. To learn more about Two Open Doors and to engage with our community, I'd like to invite you to visit the Two Open Doors private Facebook group for posts and discussion, and the Two Open Doors meetup group for events. I also invite you to contact me directly by writing to me at Claude, C-L-A-U-D-E, @twoopendoors.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll use your inputs to guide my work on future blog posts and podcast episodes. Thanks for visiting Two Open Doors.